All right, welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listener. Good evening, listeners. It is a chilly but lovely day here in suburban Chicago, and I am walking home from the train, keen to talk to you about some stuff. I figure it's time, as I often do each year, to do a sort of year in review episode. Now, in the past, when I first started the podcast, I think maybe the first year I did it, I did a best games of the previous year episode. So, like a best games of, that would be like a few podcasts or other YouTube channels I've watched have done episodes like the best of 2021. But one of the things I discovered, and I'm pretty sure I stole this from somewhere, but I can't remember where. One of the things I discovered is that I haven't played enough games from 2021 to really be able to reasonably talk about the best games of 2021. I mean, it just ended. I'm not like one of these rootin' tootin' board game video people who gets a whole bunch of review copies and stuff. I played a few 2021 games, but not nearly enough to reasonably do a review, like a best of list. So what I started doing a couple years ago is at the beginning of the year, I will do a best of list of the games I've played from the year before the year that just ended. So that's right. Right now I'm going to do my best of 2020 list. So a little bit about how I compiled the list. I went through my logged plays and I searched up every game from 2020 that I had played. Now there are a few games in there that seemed like they couldn't possibly be 2020 games, but I just used the Board Game Geek publication date as the date for the game. So if Board Game Geek says it was published in 2020, that's what I say. So that said, looking through there, I ended up with 46 games. So I've played 46 different games that were published in 2020. Most of these I don't own, but a few of them I do. And what I wanted to do to talk to you today about that. Now, last year, I did 2 episodes like this. I did a best of 2019 list, and I did a superlatives episode where I picked out, instead of just best of, I picked out a couple different titles that I could use to call out interesting games. So this year, I'm only going to do 1 episode because I just did a survey of all the games I'd played and figured out the best games I'd played, and on my top 50 list that I just released, there were 5 games from 2020. So my best of 2020 list is already there. Number 5, Calico. Number 4, My City. Number 3, Bonfire. Number 2, On Mars. Number 1, Anno 1800. That's my best of 2020 list. I've already done it. You just go through my top 50 and pick out the games from 2020, and there it is. So I'm not going to spend any more time talking about that right now. If you want to know what I think about those games, just back yourself up a couple episodes and listen to my top 50. 6 episodes, 50 games. Actually, I think it's 8 episodes, 50 games, all glory. So what I'm going to do is my superlatives episode. In case this is a word that is not part of your regular vocabulary, superlative means a word about something being the best in some particular way. So the way this list works is instead of just talking about the best games, I pick a sort of subcategory and I talk about games of a particular type and how they fit. It's a way to talk about games I like from 2021 or from 2020 that aren't in my top 5, but I still want to sort of call them out. I hope you can understand. All right, the first superlative game I want to call out is Best Title. This is Gods Love Dinosaurs. I think this is a great little title. It gives you a little bit about the goal of the game, a little bit about the theme of the game. It's attractive and funny. It's easy to find and spell. And the game itself is pretty fun. So if you're looking for the game with the best title from 2020, I would say it's Gods Love Dinosaurs. Still working from theme, I'm going to offer the best game that made me buy other games with the same theme. So the best theme completion game or the theme inspiration game. And this is Bees. That's Beez. This is a game from designer Dan Halstead and Plan B Games. No, it's a different B. It's not a Plan Bumblebee Games. It's just Plan B Games, but they publish Bees. This is a neat little abstract game in which you're flying this bee around this flower garden collecting pollen, and your goal is to collect an arrangement of pollen that allows you to fill out your honeycomb hive with the best combination of pollen tokens that gets you points. And with each turn, you have to move your bee, and you can't ever move your bee straight forward. You're always moving your bee sideways or backwards, and the direction and distance you move it depends on which direction you decide to move, or the distance you move it depends on the direction you move it. So there's this interesting planning element that goes into the game that makes for intriguing experience. Plus, the bee figures are super cute. Now, once I had that game, then a little while later, I heard a whole bunch of good vibes about Honey Buzz. And so when I had a chance to pick up a copy of Honey Buzz, I did so, and it went over pretty well in my household. It's become a game we enjoyed. And so now I had Bees and Honey Buzz, which makes me feel like, man, I really ought to have more bee-themed games. And sure enough, a little while later, I had the opportunity to pick up Bees from Action Phase Games. Bees is spelled B-E-E-E-E-E-S apostrophe or exclamation point. So 5 E's in that if you're trying to spell it. And this is a speed die rolling game in which you are trying to match dice onto flowers, and then you collect the flowers. It's a fun little thing. And it makes for a nice rounding out of my collection of bee games. A runner-up in this category of game having to do with completing a theme, I did also in 2020 games, I picked up Athenium, which is a game about organizing a library in a sort of magical world of magical library tomes. Of course, this is the same plot as Ex Libris. Weirdly enough, Athenium is also published by Renegade Games, the same publisher as Ex Libris. But then I also have Big Book of Madness, which is a game about students going into a magical library and messing around with the books. So seeing all of those themes blending together is a particular delight for me. Next up on my superlative list, I'm going to offer best art design. Now, there are a lot of incredible games from 2020 in terms of how they look, but the one I'm going to call out that I've played that I thought was really neat was Grand Carnival. So Grand Carnival is a little path building area, sort of an area control game or set collection game. You can go back and listen to my Shooting from the Hip episode where I talk about it. I've only gotten to play it the once, so I don't remember it in super great detail, but I do remember the art and design. It's a nicely created package in which the whole thing feels like something right out of the 1920s. The art style uses what I would call Fleischer animation style. It's not Fleischer. It's more like early Warner Brothers or even Disney. The most common referent for that kind of style today would be Cuphead. Uses this sort of old-timey drawn and hand-drawn animation style. And it imagines this sort of circus where you are building exhibits and putting out barkers with these cute little meeples. The whole thing has this really cohesive art design style that looks really nice and makes for a lovely presentation of an otherwise pretty good game. But I think that the art design really raises it a bit. Now, this is not the same as just the game having great art. I don't think Grand Carnival would make my list of a game that had great art. But a great design, great art design, the functional play experience of the game was augmented by the way it looked and the choices that they made in designing it. So that is Grand Carnival, the best game with regard to art design in 2020. Oh, before I leave the art design discussion, I will also call out the biggest miss, and that is Beyond the Sun. I like Beyond the Sun quite a bit, although I've never played it in person. I've seen people playing it in person, and I've played it online. But the art design is ugly. Like, it's just so focused on being functional. It just doesn't feel pretty to me. It doesn't feel, it's entirely utilitarian. It could use a bit of zhuzh. So the miss for me there is Beyond the Sun. The next game I wanted to put into the conversation would be the best expansion of 2020, and that is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the Baker Street Irregulars. Now, it had been a hot minute since Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective got an expansion, and that's because the first 3 boxes that Space Cowboys published over the last 5 years or so were reprints of the older original expansions to the original game. From Yastari, I think, is the original publisher. But the new game had not had any new content created yet until now. The Baker Street Irregular collection was created by designer Dave Neal and built on the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective model, but also added some new features to it. The additional mechanisms that allowed for the game to have a little bit of memory really added a lot to the experience of the game. And it was nice to have a few mysteries that weren't just murders, but rather other kinds of things as well. There's one mystery that really makes incredibly good use of the map in a way that I hadn't really seen the game do very successfully before that. And just overall, the experience of playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, working your way through the Baker Street Irregular box set, was an absolute delight, and I'm super happy to have gotten the opportunity to try it. So that's my best expansion of 2020, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the Baker Street Irregulars. Next up, I'm going to offer my biggest surprise of 2020. This is a game that came out and I was surprised by, and that's Praga Caput Regni. Now, here's why I was surprised about it, because I didn't like it quite as much as I thought I would. So, Praga Caput Regni is the latest big box game from Vladimir Suchy, a designer whom I talk about a lot on this podcast, and you all know I think is just the bee's knees, to call back an earlier idea. And as such, I would have thought that Praga Caput Regni was going to be a grand slam home run for me. And I do really like it, certainly, but something about the mix of actions that you're taking, about the mix of components, about the way the board looks, all of that together, the more I've played it, the more I realize it's like a middling success for me with regard to Suchy. It is not in the top echelon of his games. It didn't make my top 50, for example. It's not better for me than Lost Will or Shipyard or Underwater Cities, maybe even Pulsar 2849. Hard to say. I'd have to play that one again. I haven't played it in a while. But so the biggest surprise for me was that Praga Caput Regni was not a higher achievement for me. That said, I still really like it. I'm looking forward to playing it more, getting to know it better. But in the meantime, that's where I land on that one. Biggest surprise, Praga Caput Regni. Finally, the last superlative I'll offer today is going to be the Parallel Creativity Award. So parallel creativity is the phenomenon by which multiple people have similar ideas about similar things and end up producing similar art in a way that feels like not necessarily they copied each other, but they both hit on the same thing at the same time. I mean, it's pretty easily explainable in the context of the zeitgeist of the public, the idea that lots of us have the same kinds of experiences, and it makes sense that lots of people would have similar ideas, and that some of those ideas would bear fruit in ways that were similar to other ideas that other people had. So in 2020, we saw a very high profile example of this in the emergence almost simultaneously of 2 or even 3 different games, depending how you classify this third one of games that are simultaneously deck builders and area control games. And that would be Lost Ruins of Arnak and Dune Imperium. Or worker placement and deck building. Both Dune Imperium and Lost Ruins of Arnak, and to a lesser degree the Dwellings of Eldervale, have as a key part of the game the accumulation of cards, and have as a key part of the game the placement of workers on a board. And often the competing of those workers in a very traditional worker placement idea. The cards that you're accumulating cycle in the standard way that deck building game cards cycle. And that's where the overlap came from. Basically, both these games hit the review scape at almost the exact same time, and they were constantly being discussed and compared together because they did very similar things. Now, I think I've come down on the side of liking Lost Ruins of Arnak a bit better than Dune Imperium. The fightiness of Dune Imperium was not as much to my taste, but both are good, and I enjoy them, although I think Dune Imperium less so, certainly. But it certainly was fun to see parallel creativity emerge there. Well, as I mentioned, there were 46 different games that I played. And these are just a small sample of the games from 2020 that I played and sort of which ones I think deserve extra attention and delight. So head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know, what are your top 5 games from 2020? If you were going to offer a couple of superlatives, what would you offer? Which games would you do you think are worth calling out and giving a special moniker to, some special title that they might not have had before? You can share that information with me in Board Game Geek Guild 3269, where we talk about the Pick Up and Deliver podcast. You could send me an email. Brendan at Rattlebox Games is a perfectly serviceable email address that I like to use. There's also my username, Wombat929, which you can use to contact me on Board Game Geek or to get in touch with me on Boîte à Jeux or on yukata.de or even Board Game Arena. In all 3 places, I'd love to talk to you using that username. Well, thank you for joining me on today on my Best of 2020 episode. I hope that you found it somewhat interesting and enlightening. Maybe it'll make your Best of 2020 podcast episodes list. If so, let me know. Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share that too. Until next time, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was, and thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.